He's been called the Jackie Robinson of film, the Black D.W. Griffith. Oscar Micheaux was an American original, the country's first black filmmaker. Shunned by the studios in Hollywood, Micheaux wrote, produced, directed, and distributed his own films. At a time when African Americans were expected to accept the status quo, he was a man who marched to the beat of his own drum. Oscar Micheaux was a towering figure even by today's standards. He was not only America's preeminent black filmmaker for 3 decades, but also the country's most prolific, having directed or produced 22 silent movies and 15 talking pictures during his illustrious career. Micheaux was born on January 2nd, 1884 in Metropolis, Illinois, a town that is today known for another man of steel. Oscar was the 5th child of former slaves from Kentucky. His father, Calvin Swan Micheaux, was illiterate, but extremely ambitious and hardworking. A landowner by age 28, Calvin was a devoted husband and dutiful provider for his wife and 11 children. Oscar's mother, Belle Goff Micheaux, though uneducated, placed a high value on books and learning. Deeply religious, Belle indoctrinated her children with Bible scripture and Booker T. Washington's teachings on black self-reliance. "It is at the bottom of life we should begin, and not at the top," she would say, quoting Washington. "Nor should we allow our grievances to overshadow our opportunities." His mother's positive influence and the proud example set by his father left a lasting impression on Oscar Micheaux and shaped his view of himself and the outside world for his entire life. Life in Metropolis at the close of the 19th century was dull for an adventurous soul like young Oscar. His father, Calvin, expected his sons to work the fields and perform various chores around the farm, none of which appealed to the precocious teenager. Micheaux received good grades in school, but felt unappreciated by his teachers. Making matters worse, his classmates thought he was strange, and older people called him worldly, a free thinker, and a dangerous associate for young Christian folks. Tired of rural life, Oscar dropped out of high school and left Metropolis. After bouncing around central Illinois, working at a car plant for 6 months, then a coal mine less than 6 weeks, Oscar Micheaux boarded a train headed for the city of his dreams, the rising black metropolis of Chicago. In the early part of the 20th century, Chicago was a city on the move, and African Americans were moving with it. They were finding new jobs, testing old boundaries, and pursuing happiness like never before. In Chicago, it seemed like anything was possible for a hardworking black man with the right attitude and a desire to succeed. When Oscar Micheaux arrived in Chicago in 1902, it was the dead of winter. His oldest brother, William, lived in a rooming house on the city's predominantly black South Side. William, who lived rent-free, allowed Oscar to stay with him for $6 a month. Suddenly desperate for work, Oscar went out in search of employment. While finding a job in Chicago was easy, finding a dependable one was a different story. For a short time, Micheaux worked at the infamous Union Stockyards, which he described as a mecca for the down and out. then briefly at a steel mill in nearby Joliet. Once back in Chicago, he registered with employment agencies and responded to help wanted ads without much luck. Eventually, he took a job shining shoes at a barbershop in Wheaton, Illinois. It was by no means the glamorous life he envisioned, but with tips and the extra money he earned pitching hay in the morning, Micheaux was able to save enough to open his first bank account. Oscar liked having his own money and the freedom it offered. Now he desired a career that would give him more of both. Abraham Lincoln, as the saying went, freed the slaves. George Pullman hired them. The largest employer of African Americans at the turn of the century was the Pullman Car Company, founded by George Mortimer Pullman. The company, which manufactured luxury railroad sleeping cars, originally hired ex-slaves as attendants, known as Pullman porters, to serve upper-class white passengers with big smiles and no complaints. Although they worked long hours on their feet without much sleep and earned barely enough to survive, a Pullman porter was one of the best jobs in the black community because it provided a steady paycheck and an opportunity to travel. They wore snappy uniforms, served famous celebrities and politicians, and knew all the latest happenings. This was the job Oscar was looking for. The 18-year-old visited the Pullman office in Chicago twice a week, hoping, like hundreds of other young black men, to secure a position. Finally, after less than a year in Chicago, Micheaux was hired on December 7, 1902, and began an exciting new chapter in his life. Oscar's first months as a Pullman porter took him to all the major cities, but it was the open frontier that fired his imagination, and he was eventually assigned to a route that traveled through Colorado, Wyoming, and Idaho before finally reaching Portland, Oregon. Micheaux got along with the affluent white passengers who liked talking about themselves as much as he liked listening, but soon realized his $25 a month salary would never be enough to provide the financial independence he sought, even with the tips he was making. Oscar supplemented his income with a widespread illegal practice called knocking down, which involved Pullman conductors charging passengers for services that weren't reported to the company. Porters were given half the money, a knockdown for looking the other way. The hustle was lucrative, but nerve-wracking for Micheaux, who had to elude company detectives known as spotters hired to spy on Pullman employees. Although he hated the guilt and paranoia that came with stealing, Oscar was able to stash away more than $2,300, nearly $80,000 in today's money, in just 18 months. Micheaux had real money to work with. All he needed now was something to invest in.